Podcasts as a form of entertainment have been exploding recently. Personally, I've been a huge fan of them ever since I came across the first season of Serial back when it first released. In fact, I rarely listen to music anymore as there's always something to learn from podcasts. And I've dived deep into many categories such as true crime, animation, food, technology, and a lot of other random stuff. But a type of podcast I've barely gotten a glimpse of are talk shows. Specifically, ones that cover topics such as philosophy, religion, psychedelics, self-help, and spirituality. However, what if I told you that there was a podcast that combines all this with humor, and select interviews from that podcast became part of an animated series co-created by Pendleton Ward, the creator of Adventure Time? Well, that's exactly what's going on in Netflix's new show, The Midnight Gospel. This limited series is described as a psycho-cosmic adventure that adapts interviews from the Duncan Trussell Family Hour podcast. I'm going to be telling you everything you should know about the series before jumping in, as well as my spoiler-free review. This video is out a few days before the series releases, and Netflix was kind enough to let me get an early glimpse of the series to make this review. So, what exactly is going on in The Midnight Gospel? After all, how can you take a podcast series that does not exactly have a story and make it into an animated show? Well, let's just say that things don't always make sense. In this show, we follow the life of Clancy, who is a spacecaster living in another dimension called the Chromatic Ribbon. This is a place where simulation farmers use powerful biocomputers to simulate universes where they harvest technology. As in, you can literally take out items from these simulated universes. This, of course, could be something super lucrative, but Clancy's not really interested in that, and ends up keeping the items he gets in his personal simulator for himself. Instead, in every world he goes to, he decides to interview a being from that planet for his space podcast. This is where the podcast guests come into play. What we listen to for most of each episode is something that was recorded without having any intention of it being animated, so the discussion between Clancy and his guests have only the vaguest connection to what's actually happening on that simulated planet.
Okay, cut to commercial.
Of course, Clancy, being the slacker that he is, has not been taking care of his universe simulator, so all the planets within it are going through their own unique apocalypse. So in each episode, there are pretty much two stories going on simultaneously. The one with Clancy, who is technically Duncan, interviewing a guest, and the one of the crazy things happening on the planet Clancy appears on. And these two narratives pretty much are just mashed together, with the occasional line of dialogue that references something happening in the world. Technically, there's also a third overarching story about Clancy and his life outside the universe simulator, and since that's where most of the continuity in the show is, it's my favorite part. But let me just say from the trailer alone, I didn't think I was going to like this show very much. Despite it actually having a pretty good art style, which is sadly a rarity for adult animated series, I was afraid it would rely too much on dark and crude humor. However, what I found was a show that was thought-provoking and insightful, even though it did get really weird at some points, especially towards the end. Personally, my favorite episodes were ones that did not tackle metaphysics or anything that dealt with abstract concepts, and instead dove into topics such as how the funeral industry has been feeding us alive for so long. While there is little connecting the philosophical conversation Clancy is having with his guests to the imaginary planet going through an apocalypse, it does make for a very rewatchable show. There is always so much going on in each of the worlds Clancy visits, and it really makes the point that each individual being on each of these simulated planets has their own lives, complete with unique hopes and dreams. These little details are probably my favorite aspect about this show, and they're just small moments, such as where the show pauses for a second to let Clancy dump some cred from his boots that make it feel so real, despite each planet being so strange. Along with that, as I have mentioned before, I actually really like the art style this show has, and how it's distinct from other shows Ward has worked on like Adventure Time and Bravest Warriors. This is most likely thanks to the show's art director, Jesse Moynihan. The choice of colors is really nice, and I love how alien some of the designs can get, but even so, things can get pretty gruesome or sexual. As for Clancy himself, I liked him despite all the terrible decisions he made. I do think it's interesting how he always seems to prefer the dying worlds in the simulator, even when life in the Chromatic Ribbon is just as crazy. But perhaps that's the point, as many people prefer imaginary worlds created by technology to anything real life may offer, no matter how exciting. Yet like so many, Clancy is trading time in these simulations with staying connected to family and friends in the real world, and there's always a cost to that. You really have to wonder if it's worth the risk, as this space cast may not even be successful. But at least he is getting advice from some amazing beings, and it helps turn him into a better person. Each episode gives a glimpse into Clancy's life at the very start and end of it, so I always look forward to that. The rest of the characters are not really reoccurring, especially the podcast guests, but each one of them is super unique, and it was always interesting to learn about their lives. It even feels weird to hear a dog like Alien suddenly start to talk about their childhood in the 50s. And since these characters are based around real life people having actual conversations, things feel more authentic than any purely scripted show could ever be. A guest could be an alien with 6 legs, 4 ears, and antlers. It's very rare to see Western adult animation do this, but I sure do love it. As I said before, I didn't think I would like the show. There's usually something that rubs me the wrong way when it comes to adult animation. But I was glad to be really surprised with this one, and despite how weird I found it at first, I really began to enjoy it. Not to say that there was nothing I found messed up, it's just that there was enough balance between those elements and elements I liked. I suppose I do wish the main character's name was Duncan, which is the name of the show's creator and host of the podcast. This is because there are several instances where the guests say Duncan, and Clancy wonders who they are talking about. I feel like this took me out of things for a moment, and for those that have no idea this show gets all these interviews from a podcast, this may be really confusing. But yeah, that's just a small nitpick. But I'm happy where things ended with the show, as it seems that this entire series is going to be over after these 8 episodes. I don't think I ever would have heard the Duncan Trussell Family Hour podcast without this show, and while I enjoyed seeing it used in such a way, I think without an overarching story, the show wouldn't have interested me as much. I suppose the best way to describe this show is to say it's the podcast version of a music video. We hear the audio from the podcast, but it's almost nothing to do with what is happening in the actual episode. With that being said, I would say watch the first 2 episodes of the show, and if you don't like it after that, it would be okay to drop since it's a lot more of the same. But I do think that most people that can handle adult animation will enjoy the show, and with only 8 episodes, it's a quick watch. But I will admit that one episode did make me quite emotional, so this show is capable of being profoundly touching, and that was something I never expected going in. So for those of you that are watching this after you tell the season, what did you think? Did you find it interesting or boring, inspiring or pedantic? Tell us in the comments. Also, if you enjoyed this review, please consider subscribing and checking out my other early reviews. I have more coming soon, so make sure to keep notifications on for that. And finally, if you want to help support the channel, you can do so on our Patreon. Patrons get a lot of cool perks, such as seeing interviews and theory videos early. Also, a huge thank you to Renny, who animated the adorable mini Hailey, who you see talking a lot in this video. This had never been done before, so I hope you look forward to seeing that more in the future. And he edited a little bit of this video as well, so thank you so much, and I'll link some of his stuff down below, his channel or any of his social media links. Have an animated day.